Hey everyone, it's Cassimus Lego, and in this new showcase video, I'm going to be showing you my custom set of the original characters based on the long-awaited Five Nights at Freddy's film produced by Blumhouse Productions alongside Scott Cawthon, the creator of this massively popular franchise. I never thought this day would actually come. It's been 8 years since this was announced, and to celebrate its national premiere, I have made my first Five Nights at Freddy's custom LEGO minifigures since 2017, depicting their classic designs from the original 2014 title. This project has been very exciting for me because from roughly FNAF 1 to 3, I was a huge fan of the games. I was there for all of the unfolding updates to piece the mysterious story together, with each release leaving a valued stamp of meaning in my youth. And to be quite honest, I feel like for myself, it really did end with FNAF 3, because even for a little while after that, I enjoyed the direction the games were going, but man, at some point they just weren't the same anymore. Maybe that was just me growing up, but the series wasn't as frightening as it once was, and the story was getting too crowded and confusing, and I eventually just walked away. But there was something that I never did forget: the announcement of the official Five Nights at Freddy's motion picture, which was something that my younger self was beyond excited to watch. And of course, we all know the story. For nearly 5 years, there was nothing but silence. But I just knew that one day, I'd still be around to make some figures when the time came, and now, after all these years, that day has actually come. I have no idea how this film will be received. Maybe it'll be awful. It's a frightening thought that what I've waited nearly a decade for will be, like the sequel trilogy, nothing more than a rotten corpse caught in a dumpster fire. But with the screenplay by Scott Cawthon himself, this film is at least in the best hands that it could possibly be in. Regardless of its performance, I wanted to respect the significance of this occasion by making these custom LEGO minifigures and producing this showcase. I sincerely hope you enjoy the 2 months of work I've put into these figures, working wherever I could around work and my university responsibilities. But with all that said and out of the way, I think it's finally time to take a close look at the animatronic characters from Five Nights at Freddy's. Let's begin with Freddy Fazbear, star of the family restaurant and namesake of the franchise, and also one of the most iconic characters to emerge from the 2010s. Now, before we get into this, I just want to make known that the incredibly talented team at Jim Henson's Creature Workshop have done an absolutely perfect job in bringing these characters to life. Just look at any kind of footage of the practical animatronics in action, and you can easily see the tremendous amount of heart and soul that was put into the characters, and I mean, they're basically perfect one-to-one recreations from the original 2014 game, which is such a love letter to longtime fans like you and I, and specifically for me, as a big fan of the original game. It was extremely exciting to work on these custom minifigures. As for the figure himself, I want to start by addressing the elephant in the room, which is all of the sculpting. Freddy has sculpting basically everywhere, from his torso all the way down to his feet. As you probably know by now, sculpting is not my best skill, I've said that before, but if I wanted these figures to look correct, I had to be prepared to do a lot of it, because not just Freddy needed all of the sculpting, everyone else needed it too. So I can assure you, there was a lot of sculpting work in this project, all uniquely shaped pieces that I had to replicate multiple times. But I'm very thankful that I decided to go this way because I think they all turned out fantastic. I can't wait for you all to see each one. For Freddy in particular, he has sculpting on his arms, both sides of his torso, the waist piece, legs, and even his feet, all to represent the bulky animatronic coverings. Because of all this sculpting, Freddy's articulation is somewhat limited, but he is still able to move his arms up and down, his legs can be posed, but only to a small extent, and his head can twist from side to side. Additionally, the stomach is slightly larger than the sculpt in the back, and even the fur highlight is a separate sculpted layer. It's painted in a lighter brown than the color used for the rest of the minifigure, by the way. Freddy's bow tie was also a challenge because I really wanted to make it out of a real ribbon, or at least some kind of fabric. And even with my preventative methods, I was still unable to find a suitable material, especially at this scale. So instead, I used the same kind of fabric that my friend Ashton, otherwise known as Benson Bone, uses for his custom capes, which has an adhesive layer on the back. So I took a sheet of that fabric and folded it over itself, and then I cut out the shape and glued it to the top of the torso. As I've said, the material isn't quite what I wanted, but at this scale, I think it turned out alright. On the arms, you can see that underneath the coverings, the endoskeleton is poking through, which is simply the standard LEGO arm just painted gunmetal. The same details can be spotted on the legs, including the top near the sculpted waist piece and in between the sculpted coverings on the legs. Finally, we can get a close look at the sculpted feet. Even though these details limit where Freddy can and cannot clip onto Lego plates, I still wanted to include them to give the figure a more realistic look. The animatronic feet paws are distinguished parts of the costumes, and leaving them off just felt wrong. I typically try to keep the Lego-ness in all of my custom figures, but I was willing to make some exceptions for the 4 minifigures that needed sculpted toes. Plus, there's the added feature that it feels like there really is some real weight to them. I also highlighted the bottom, and that wraps around the entire figure, even between the legs. Now I think it's about time to talk about this head, which I'm sure you've already noticed by now. In the past, I've always sculpted the heads myself, but for this project, I finally gave myself the advantage I needed. In 2020, I picked up a set of those off-brand FNAF minifigures. You've probably seen them floating around in other videos, but you see they have really accurate custom head molds that I knew would come in handy someday if I ever decided to make more FNAF minifigures. So 3 years later, I was able to use all of the heads on each respective animatronic to make for some really solid depictions of the characters. They were the perfect base, although there were some modifications that I needed to do to make them all the more better. For instance, Freddy, and Bonnie for that matter, have these really bizarre teeth in their mouth, which if you look at the costumes used for the film, are not quite what they should look like. So I began by sanding out the teeth so that the entire mouth would be flush. Then I dry sculpted my own teeth, 6 to be exact, and by hand, glued them all into the lower jaw piece, which was an extremely tedious process. And after that, I re-sculpted the bottom of the mouth to restructure the edges and maintain its shape. I personally think they came out rather nice. With sculpting on the head out of the way, it was time to move on to painting. First, I painted the white for the eyes in the correct blue color. Next, I painted all of the brown coating, muzzle details, eyebrows, and Freddy's stylish black top hat. One of my favorite details of the head are the ears. They both have indents highlighted in dark brown with a glossy black outline, which really stands out to me. You've probably also noticed by now that on the entire figure is some light weathering. That was achieved by dry brushing the figure with dark brown and dark gray paint. All of the minifigures in this video have the weathering just to give Freddy and his friends some extra realism, because obviously the characters are known to be old and really filthy. Freddy's hand can be swapped out for his one and only accessory, his microphone for singing songs. It's a standard Lego element, and all I did was paint the silver on top. Nothing else was necessary. That's all of the details I wanted to talk about on Freddy Fazbear. That was a lot, but don't worry, the rest of these segments will be much simpler since I don't need to speak about details I already covered here. I can't wait to see Freddy come to life on the big screen after all these years. Behind Freddy is his friend Bonnie, responsible for nearly everyone's first jump scare. He's probably just as famous and is my own personal favorite of the mascots. Out of the custom minifigures for this project, I'd say Bonnie is also my favorite that I made. Obviously, I went with the brighter blue that Bonnie's movie design has opted for, which I think was the right call on the part of the creature shop. Right away, you can see that Bonnie is ready to rock and roll, as he is equipped with the second version of his electric guitar. I'm actually quite excited to talk about this because I'm really fond of the way it turned out. It's basically completely custom, and originally, the shape was entirely different, resembling the V-shaped version that we all know and love. But to match the modern design, I had to cut off the body, and then I resculpted the triangular shape and painted it in the base dark gray colors. To give some depth to the instrument, the red layer is a 3D piece made from E-tape, and I painted all the details that you see, including the various knobs and even the strings that run parallel all the way down the neck. You can decide if my attempts to line them up were successful or not. I just wanted to paint them on so I could avoid bulking up this little accessory with too many 3D elements. The head has its own details in the form of these sculpted tuning pegs as well. Bonnie's guitar even has a fabric strap that attaches to 2 parts of the guitar so that it can realistically rest on the shoulders like the real prop in the film, although it does make attaching the accessory a tad tricky. Removing the guitar reveals more of the sculpting on Bonnie, which is essentially the exact same body, legs, and arms as I made for Freddy, of course picked out in his signature blue color. Like Freddy, he has the same 3D chest highlight painted in light gray. His bow tie is also cut from a similar ribbon, but instead I painted it in dark red. Bonnie's weathering is pretty light. I dry brushed him with a combination with a standard blue color actually, and a dark gray. The back gives a good look at these details. With Bonnie's head, I followed a similar development process. I sanded out the existing teeth to make room for my own sculpted versions. Instead of the rectangular flat shapes that Freddy has, I sculpted Bonnie's teeth to be more rounded, which is accurate. and then I re-sculpted the bottom jaw. If you look closely, you can even see that I painted the red surface that spans the bottom of Bonnie's mouth. The eyes were just as fun and tedious to do as on every other figure. I started out with the white, and then I added the iris and pupil details. The eyelids only cover up about a fourth of the white surface. I really like the dull and yet eerie expression that I managed to capture on the figure. He looks just like how Bonnie stares into the security cameras in the original game. The muzzle, like the torso highlight, is painted in light gray. You might have thought that there was really an indent carved down the middle of the snout mold, but actually that was a last minute detail that I decided to paint on in darker gray, which I really like. Most of my efforts on this head went into the painting of the ears. I had to carefully weave my brush around the light gray fur and subtract the gloss black to make just the slightest outline just like on Freddy, which also really stands out. Like I said, I haven't been as descriptive with Bonnie because in essence, he and Freddy are pretty similar as far as painting and sculpting goes. So there's not much new here for me to point out besides the character-specific details and his custom guitar. But I'm still extremely fond of how this minifigure turned out. As I mentioned earlier, Bonnie is probably my favorite of the custom minifigures that I made, but I won't lie, it was a tough choice for me, as this next minifigure is also one I'm really proud of. That figure is none other than the lovable and yet simultaneously terrifying Chica. Man, some of my fondest memories of the original game was just seeing her tilted posture in the cameras and being so creeped out by them. Chica was definitely creepy, and I'm hoping to see some of that get portrayed in the movie. That said, I think this figure is very accurate, and I'm pretty excited to get to talk about her. It makes the most sense to first look at Chica's little buddy, who's a character in his own right, that being the Cupcake, otherwise known by us FNAF fans as Carl. He looks very fancy sitting on this specially designed serving tray. I actually sculpted that rather than using an official or bootleg element, and that's just so I could freely match the size of the actual plate seen in reference images I was using. As you can see, Chica is not actually gripping onto the plate in any shape or form, but rather I decided to simply glue it on top of this Lego hand. Since it's so easy to swap out the hands, I didn't see it as a big deal. I painted it in black and then gave it a glossy coat of sealant. Carl himself was made from the knockoff piece that came with the set of the off-brand minifigures I described earlier. I gave him the same painted eye treatment as the other animatronics and then painted all around his body with the magenta pink to represent the icing. There's even the angled stripes on the candle topped off with a permanent flame. The white buck teeth also look pretty clean. And don't worry, Carl can be freely removed from the plate as he is just held on by this rod piece. Overall, I think this famous pink cupcake turned out pretty great and I'm really excited to see him get chomping in the film. Chica herself is also quite a great figure. Obviously, she shares all the animatronic sculpting that I've already discussed extensively, but she has her own unique details such as her bib and her feet. Chica's 2 feet are sculpted and the claws are represented by these circular white hemispheres. There's a bit of this specific weathering on the orange coverings too, which I dry brushed on after I used sealant on the feet and the beak to resemble a semi-gloss plastic coat. Chica, of course, has her bib with the iconic "Let's Eat" hand painted. The lettering turned out looking great especially, but it was not easy to do this. I spent a good few hours on the lettering alone because it's such a crammed typeface that I really wanted to emphasize, as it's such a specific detail to Chica's character. I began the painting process with the dark purple outline, which at first just looked like nothing more than a bunch of purple blobs, but once I figured out the spacing of the yellow letters, mostly by trial and error I might add, it really started to come together. I love how eye-catching it is, and I hope you agree. It looks straight from the actual costume in my opinion. The rest of the confetti detail on the sculpted bib are just microscopic triangles painted in red, blue, and yellow in random locations. I didn't keep any consistency, and I didn't think I needed to. The sculpted bib also continues to the back and reveals more of the confetti design. I actually sculpted the bib in 3 layers, if you can believe that. I started out with the front, then the back, and then I connected the ends at the top of the torso with the seams thankfully hidden by the head. Which, speaking of the head, this knockoff head mold was absolutely perfect to start from. It's a fantastic shape while retaining the narrow profile quite well. Chica's irises looked very red in reference photos, even though I knew for a fact that she's supposed to have purple eyes. So for quite a while I was making her, she had irises that were red. It was only when I took an extremely close second look that I noticed they were actually kind of a magenta hue, so very quickly I remade them and I think they look so much better. The beak, though, was the harder part of the head to tackle. The space between the beak was just too small, so sculpting my own 3D teeth was not going to be an option like the other 2. So instead, I simply painted them, which was very difficult in such a cramped space. She has a clean set of 8 micro rectangles, perfect for chewing on pizza. The top of the beak has nostril details too. The eyebrows are quite bold as well. I painted them on by following the raised sections that were already existing, but in hindsight, I kind of wish I sanded them down and sculpted my own so that I could have made her look more menacing. Finally, the entire figure has light dry brush weathering all throughout the arms, legs, torso, and head. But with all that said, that's it for Chica and her pal Carl. Another excellent figure in this lineup. What do you guys think? Does this figure give you the creeps? Let me know. Now let's move on to the original fan favorite. Here's Foxy the Pirate, and honestly, he's my least favorite of the custom figures I made for this project. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love Foxy as a character, and his painting turned out very clean, and even the custom modifications to the torso and the arms are nice, but I feel like I could have done so much more with this custom. I feel like I've missed out on accurately portraying Foxy's damage. For instance, all I've done to show it on the torso is cut out the center shape and shoved a Lego skeleton inside, when in actuality, when you look at official images of Foxy in the film, his torso piece is just barely hanging on to the endoskeleton, with the tops near the arm joints completely torn away. And I didn't really do that. I was concerned about the stability of the figure. I could have made a completely unique skeleton accurate to his in the film, but instead, I went with the standard Lego torso with some modifications, which is what I was familiar with since this is how I've always made Foxy in Lego. But I should have pushed the boundary and made something entirely different to anything I've done before. I don't want to criticize this figure too much because the rest of it is still really good, but that was just something I wanted to get right out in the open. Some of the great things about this Foxy figure specifically are his head, the arms, and his fabric shorts. I'll start out at the bottom and work my way up. Even if I was going to create a custom base for Foxy's body, I still would have incorporated Lego skeleton legs because they look great on Foxy minifigures. They have the ability to clip into plates, and they're still a good match for representing the endoskeleton feet. Although, instead of chopping off the bottoms and gluing them to Lego legs, I actually just used the entire skeleton leg piece, which is why the waist looks so slender. I painted all the visible pieces in gunmetal while leaving off certain areas so that he could still move his feet. It wouldn't be Foxy if he couldn't book it down the hallway. Covering the exposed areas is this custom ripped up shorts made from fabric. It's glued in place to the top of the legs and wraps to the back and then connects in the front. It has its own painted details like belt loops, a fastener, more tears, and even the general outline, but the details are a bit hard to see against the color of the fabric. I also want to point out that the rips on the bottom edges are as accurate as I could get them at this scale. The skeleton's spine runs up the torso and connects with the rib cage inside. You can see that I also cut into the bottom of Foxy's torso to angle it, and I also cut into Foxy's right to give the hole there. The chest fur, unlike his friends, is not sculpted and is directly painted on the torso in a custom color that I mixed together. I've always loved how the Lego skeleton ribcage piece is visible through the torso. It's been a staple of custom FNAF figures for nearly a decade now. This attempt in particular looks great too, even if the whole shape isn't as accurate as it really should be. I didn't cut into the back of Foxy's torso though, and I just simply painted the endoskeleton details on, as by the time I was working on this, I just didn't have as much time as I thought. Seriously, these past 2 months have gone by ridiculously fast. Anyway, there's also this little hole painted toward the center of the torso, which I found out was actually a spot to plug in a crane into the actual animatronic during filming, since Foxy's design is so skinny and needed extra support. I thought Foxy really did have a tail at some point, and this was just what was left over in the film's canon. To represent Foxy's thin arms, I actually did make my own custom arms. I cut standard Lego arms in half, and then I took the end of a Lego antenna, the end with the ball. I cut that off, and then I glued the arms with the ball in between to make these really crazy looking arms. Of course, I also had to cut directly into the plastic of the arms to show all the damage, with my favorite bit of damage being this long canal in Foxy's right arm. There's sculpting on both arms as well, that being the shoulder pads, and even these small hairs on both sides of the torso. In Foxy's right arm is his classic and quite dangerous for children, his pirate hook, which was made from a standard Lego pirate hook, and I painted it in gunmetal. The other arm is topped off with a standard Lego hand, but I actually also painted it in gunmetal and even painted some hand detail before covering it in sealant to prevent it from scratching off. Even though it's basically inevitable, I think it's a neat inclusion. And no, in case you're wondering, these Foxy arms did not catch on fire. It's no surprise that Foxy's head took up most of my attention, because unlike the other knockoff figures, I really didn't like the base Foxy head. I didn't like the eyebrows or the snout, and I absolutely hated how the mouth looked, as there wasn't even negative space in between the mouthpieces. So I knew right off the bat that this was going to need some serious modifications if I was going to use it. I started out by removing everything that I didn't like and got to sanding, which I can assure you was not a pretty sight after I was done with it. Eventually, I got to the point where I thought the base would work, and then from the ground up, I resculpted the mouth, the snout, the eye patch, basically everything. I even used the ends of toothpicks for sharp teeth, even though it's not so sharp on the actual figure. Once I was done tweaking and sanding everything, it was time for the paint, which was pretty straightforward from there. The snout is the same custom color as that on the torso fur, by the way. I waited until his head was ready to go before I did that, and all of the teeth are white aside from his gold tooth. I also extended the ears by gluing them to a part of a Lego stem piece. Foxy's eyebrows are custom, and so is his eye patch, which wraps around all the way to the back of the head and is covered by a strip of duct tape he has represented by this light gray 3D element. And down by the neck is just more of the endoskeleton illusion that I tried to do on the torso. I really should have just cut that part out and glued his head onto a silver stick at that point. But as I said, this Foxy figure still represents the character well, even though I regret not doing so much more. And with that, that's all for the classic Fazbear crew, but don't go away just yet because there is still one more figure to take a look at. Last but certainly not least is the ghostly Golden Freddy, and I have no idea what the filmmakers are going to do with his character. We've only seen glimpses of the infamous yellow bear, so it's a total mystery for all of us. That said, he obviously plays a big role as he stands front and center in one of the alternate posters for the film, so I guess if anything, I had plenty of references for the back, because beyond that, there's not a whole lot of official looks out there. Thankfully, there's not a lot of work that required source images, so he's basically a recolor of Freddy with his missing left ear and exposed wiring through the eye. I think it was also appropriate that Golden Freddy was the most withered out of all the minifigures, so I did a lot more on him, using a mixture of dry brushing and washing to make him as dirty and dilapidated as possible without drowning the figure in too much grime. I think I struck a nice and presentable balance that looks quite nice. But yes, all of the sculpting is the exact same as on Freddy and Bonnie, which made for 3 approximately identical figure sculpts, and even the bow tie is the same fabric material as his regular counterpart. I don't want to dwell for too long on him, so we'll get straight into the character's specific head. Golden Freddy has had a missing left ear since FNAF 2, so I'm glad the Creature Shop made sure to include that detail for the film appearance. The exposed wire is sculpted and appears in varying colors of red, dark blue, and yellow. Additionally, I painted the tips in silver. I also cut out the sphere in the left eye so that I could paint some more of the wires as if they were continuing inside of the mask. Golden Freddy's muzzle and torso fur is, like Foxy, a custom mixed color to highlight the differences in fur tone. And I painted that a few nights before I began to weather the figure, which made it more frightening to add the filthy detail, as if I wasn't careful and I did too much, I'd end up ruining the color and I'd have to start again. But thankfully, by help with the wash, I managed to keep everything looking consistent to one another. As far as the other details go, the ears are painted just like Freddy, and his top hat was too, perhaps being more shiny on this figure. I find it fitting that I don't have much to say about Golden Freddy, since there's just so much we don't know about his presence in the film, and I suppose we'll just have to find out. But now that we've looked at Golden Freddy, Golden Fredbear, Yellow Bear, whatever you want to call him, that's everything I wanted to show you for my 5 Nights at Freddy's project. These guys have been some great custom figures that depict these haunted animatronics that somehow mean a lot to me, and I hope you enjoyed learning about the process of making them in Lego. So now let's go ahead and start concluding this showcase video. Alright, so that was Freddy and his friends. Thank you very much for watching all the way to the end of this video. If you enjoyed this video, I encourage you to consider leaving a like. If you're as excited that this film actually exists like I am, or if you have any thoughts or critiques, you can let me know by writing me a comment. This video has been a very, very, very long time coming, but now that the showcase is officially wrapped, it's time for this new era of FNAF cinematic experiences. So yeah, the FNAF movie has finally come out, and now it's time for me to go pay Freddy Fazbear's Pizza a long-expected visit. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.